7 a.m. Time to wake up, Caitlin.
I have told you a million times I don't get up until 9.
Here is your coffee, Caitlin.
Deprogram. Snooze.
Extra cream.
Snooze button.
Shower is on.
I'm standing now. Fuck.
Temperature established.
Okay. Oh my god. How much did we pay for this robot again? It's ruining my life.
Have a bagel.
Actually, that is the first good thing that you've done for me.
Extra cream cheese, Caitlin.
Okay, thank you.
Have some orange juice.
Part of this balanced breakfast. Okay, I'm gonna go work now. I'm gonna go to my office and get some...
Doing dishes.
Okay, thank you. This part I like.
The dishes are done.
Oh, that's great. Okay, well, I'm gonna be in this other room. I'm gonna close the door. Click.
Time to start work, Caitlin.
Oh, fuck, you're in here too.
Here is your pencil, Caitlin.
I actually work mostly on the computer.
Here is your pencil,
If that's...
Caitlin. Here is your pencil, Caitlin.
Somebody help me. What's the service number? 911.
Hello, Caitlin. Can I help you?
Hello? Emergency services? I'm Caitlin Cadieux, an animated illustrator.
Hello. I am Ira, house robot. I output comic art.
And this is a podcast about cartoons, where two lifelong artists and robot talk about the mysterious and magical process of bringing good cartoon stories to life. And I'm really glad that we're laughing so much here in the upfront part, because it's a lot less funny when we actually get into it.
Take your happy pill, Caitlin.
Thank you, house robot. In today's episode, we're talking about, I forgot the name of it.
There will come soft rains.
Mrs. McClellan. So, with absolutely no further editorializing of any kind,
welcome to Cartoon Feelings. Here we are, Caitlin, at the end of everything.
The wisdom of Gandalf.
I think so, right? Is that's a Gandalf thing?
I think like so. Or does Sam say that? Somebody says something about the end of all things. I don't know. We're there, though, like, indisputably.
Yeah, we're here at the end. I mean, it's been a good run. Episode 13.
Oh, shit. The most haunted of episodes.
It definitely is.
Oh, no.
So I thought before we got into the year 2026, as the story is set, we could look back at our history together. And so this is a movie about a house this week, right?
That's true.
So I thought we would talk about some residences from our past episode first, and a little game I call vacancies. Maybe not a game. Maybe it's more of a segment.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is a segment.
So here's the segment this week. We've traveled to a variety of places across the world. And at the end of every journey, there's usually a residence left empty. So I thought it would just be fun to reflect on all those empty spaces that we've seen in our previous cartoons, and each of us pick which one we would want to occupy in the state it was left at the end of the film.
Oh, okay. And that changes some things for me.
Yeah, it's quite specific. So what you can see in the doc here, I've shared a couple. Of course, if you've got some other ones you want to throw in, but I'll kind of go through these and you could think it over and see if there's anything else you want to add to it. So imagine like this cartoon Craigslist, I guess, of like open vacancies in these apartments. So first off, we have Mabe's abandoned wolf cave in Kilkenny from Wolfwalkers. Kind of damp, but nice. Going all the way back to The Incredibles, we have their mid-century home. But It's a post-syndrome attack home, so rough shape.
Yeah.
We've got Brendan's stone hut where he composed the Book of Kells. Temporary housing. We've got, this is a two-parter. This could go either way depending on your scale. We've got the Rats of Nim farmhouse or the rose bush. Depends what cartoon version of yourself you are. Human Caitlin or, rat Caitlin.
It's definitely rat Caitlin. We all know.
It's just in general, it's just the default is rat Caitlin. And then a contemporary one, Uncle Aaron's old apartment somewhere probably in Brooklyn from Spider-Verse.
Yeah, it's probably in like a kick-ass part of town.
Yeah, I mean, he was a criminal. He probably had some money.
Yeah, it was a sweet apartment it's not huge, but like it was a cool apartment. I'm sure it's in a cool location. I don't like how easy it is to get in there from the fire escape, apparently.
Well, that's the trick with all these. They're all kind of cursed in their own little way, right? They've either been like the destroyed in an Act 3 climactic fight, or just simply abandoned as our characters move on to the next point of their life. Or they've just got like now this backstory. They're like, oh, did you know that's that dude's apartment? He's the one that like tried to kill Spider-Man.
I would totally live in that apartment.
Yeah.
I would love that.
So what do you think? You have anything to add to the vacancies list? Any desirable housing?
So does it count if we add Burroughs' Burrow from Burrow?
Totally. I was trying to think of, there's so many to pick from, though. That was the problem.
I feel like that's cheating. I think, honestly, you could just count the whole thing, and maybe you would be in the rabbit zone, because it's all connected, so it's a little fluid.
Well, here's a question for you. When we left the Burrow animated film, was it all damp from the gush of water that rushed through their burrow, or had it dried out completely, you think?
I think it had dried out, because you see more of like a construction montage than at the end where it's all coming together and they're all like happy to be putting her bedroom together. So I feel like it ends on a positive note of being in good condition.
Okay, let's say it's a dry burrow then. Well, that's a lot more appealing, because in my mind I'm like, mud burrow, that sucks.
Yeah, but that would have been a bummer ending for that short. Like,
yeah,
you just ruined it for everyone. The end.
Yeah, you got to be careful where you end your movies, everyone.
Make sure that you put the ending on it.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think what else we got. Because in Soul, I don't know, does it count? Does like Joe Gardner's apartment count?
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. He's got a nice piano. I'm sure it's recently tuned and everything.
Yeah, and it has like a very soft lighting. And like, if I'm not mistaken, he has like bookshelves just stacked, like full of records. And that seems really cool. Like, that seems like a really cool setup. He seems to not have to have a roommate, which is very appealing to me in New York. So both of the New York City options are really strong at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are all the contenders, though, if I'm not much mistaken.
Yeah, pretty much. I know we began this whole series with just a giant overview of every Pixar movie ever, which looking back now seems totally ridiculous.
Yeah, we've evolved quite a bit since then.
So I just stuck with The Incredibles because that's kind of where we honed it in, focused.
Well, and here's another question.
Mm-hmm.
Does The Incredibles 2 house count? Because as far as I'm aware, that house remains fully intact and livable at the end of that movie. Although I can't remember. There might be like a big hole in it from the Incredimobile or whatever.
Right, and it
showing up and like blasting out at high speed.
There's also going to be a lot of water damage because Frozone was just running wild in there.
That water feature in that house like seems really cool, but I bet it's freaking nasty. Like, you gotta just the potential for property damage aside, like water gets funky if you just like let it chill. I don't know.
Yeah, the upkeep on that place is it'd be a real burden, I think. So, yeah. I mean, for me personally, that's too much house.
I agree with you. I don't have a big family, so my rats don't need that much space.
No, to them, your little studio room is probably...
Yeah, this is the world.
Yeah, that's their little universe.
So I will say, number one would have been the Incredibles house from the first Incredibles because of how very good it is. But if we have to take it in the condition in which it arrives at the conclusion of the movie, it doesn't exist at all anymore. So I don't want to live in the husk, the burned out shell of somebody else's really nice house.
Okay, fair.
So I'm going to have to go with... So this is human Caitlin is going to say Uncle Aaron's apartment.
Okay.
Because it's so dope and like... I don't know. Do I get all his stuff too? I'm assuming I get all his stuff. So I'd have like a cool like
he's
tiger
dead. It's just there.
painting on the wall, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be able to box anytime, which is pretty appealing. But Rat Caitlin is all about that rose bush. Like the rose bush is cool as hell. So I don't know if that's cheating to include my...
No, you can split your soul in half and be half New York resident.
Yeah, I think it's only fair.
And rural rosebush rat.
And the rosebush appeals to like my mystical sensibilities. Like Uncle Aaron's apartment is like, for like practical reasons, like this is the coolest, most viable option.
Yeah.
You know, but if I'm getting weird, the rosebush is like where I'm gonna want to be at.
So you don't think, now all the rats are gone, you don't think you'd be really lonely in that rosebush?
I'd have to bring my own.
Yeah, you'd start your own rats of...
I'd make my peace with that. Because I was gonna say... Maeve's Wolf Cave is like very much my vibe and my situation. I like that a lot. Mm-hmm. But it would be really sad. I mean, they all moved away. So
I know. And
like, do I have wolf capabilities? Because if I have wolf capabilities and I can accumulate my own situation, I don't know. It just doesn't seem... They left, right? Like, nobody wants to buy the house where they're like desperate to get out of this house. Like, it's probably haunted or in a place where the farmers are going to burn down the whole forest or whatever. So it just doesn't seem like a viable option at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's not a great neighborhood, I would think.
Mm-mm.
Personally, I think I'm going to indulge like this fantasy that I would love to just sit in the middle of nowhere and just like write a book by hand. So, I mean, honestly, I just want to be on the internet all the time, and anything I do is just an excuse to like indulge the internet. But in my fantasy world, I would live in Brendan's stone hut, the one they go to. You know, when the Abbey's in distress, they flee and they go work on their book. That seems like
it's like where they go far away to go and where they like spend where he grows up.
Yes,
essentially at the end of the movie. Yeah,
I could use some growing up. And also, they had a nice little house party, I remember, in the montage of working on the book. They have a bunch of people over. They're doing a reading. You know, I'm sure there was like some drinking involved. So
yeah, honestly, I like that a lot. I didn't really consider it from that aspect. I think it's just because what I really want in life is to go live in a stone hut in the woods.
Yeah.
So it seems like too obvious. It's a great choice.
I mean, half of our options here are set in Ireland because we've done so many Irish movies.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of like damp, kind of misty locations.
Are not like very widespread because it's like Ireland and New York City are a big chunk of this.
Yes.
And then like, I don't know, I guess Burrow would be in California.
Yeah, that's on some like orange farm somewhere outside of, I don't know, Berkeley, maybe.
And wait, where does The Incredibles take place? Just like every town USA? Like it's not, I don't think it's ever specified. It's all like Municiburg, like made up places.
Yeah, it's like a Springfield type of town, I imagine. Because it doesn't look very West Coast when they're in the city necessarily.
No, and like I was going to say, I mean, it's a coastal city because it's like by the ocean, but it doesn't evoke New York to me like how I kind of thought maybe it would.
True, yeah. Yeah, just a nondescript kind of cartoon city.
No, I don't like its libertarian sensibilities. So maybe that would have been a bad... Like, do we have to live in the universe, too, that these occupy? Because that...
Yeah, all the baggage comes with it.
Yeah,
that's part of the deal.
Go The Incredibles. That's... No.
All of these places are going to seem quite pleasant after we get into the setting of today's film, which is There Will Come Soft Rains, a 1984 release, directed by
Nazim Tuliahadzaev. At a guess, not confident, but that might be an accurate pronunciation of the name of the person who directed this weird thing.
So just a quick summary. We'll give you the longer rundown later once we get into the full plot of this movie. But basically, it's a story of an automated house in California on New Year's Eve in the year 2026, not long after a nuclear disaster.
And not long after today and this year, which is very unnerving.
No, this is all coming quite soon.
Yeah, I don't feel good about that.
So, make amends with the people you've upset in the past.
I will never do it.
Any advice I'm offering is for the unknown masses out there. It's never for you, Caitlin. I would never dare give you advice.
That's true. I'm intractable.
So this is a dark film. So if you haven't watched it yet, you can find a decent version of it on YouTube if you do a little searching.
Yeah, maybe we'll post this link in the notes so you can find it, because as Ira and I have talked to each other about several times, like, we've both seen this movie before, but in the worst fathomable quality. Like, it was very much like a lost film, I guess. Like, the first time I saw it was some obscure website, I don't know, and it was like as tiny as you could fit between your like index and thumb, like itty bitty, like bad quality. And it was just like, this is the stuff that we live for, I guess, like seeking out this and like trying to make it out. But Ira found this really good quality version of it on YouTube. So
we'll throw it in the show notes. Now, I've got a question for you. When you were finding this movie, can you just tell me a little bit about the magic of discovering like animations on the internet?
This is horrible because I'm like, I don't remember how I found this. And I want to say it wasn't actually that long ago. Like, I watched this. This is weird, but I told Ira this too. Like, I watched this for the first time. It was Christmas Eve, and it was at like 2 a.m. So I guess it was Christmas Day, actually. But I was just like awake in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house. So I was in a very haunted situation already, right? Like sleeping in your childhood bedroom, but it's been completely remade into somebody else's room now. Like, it's like my dad's den for game stuff, but there's still a bed in there for me. So it's already like a time for ghosts. But this was probably like 4 or 5 years ago, maybe at this point. And
okay,
I don't know what I was doing, but yeah, I was in one of those weird internet rabbit holes, just digging around for stuff. And I probably found it on like a forum or something. I couldn't tell you honestly, but definitely not like, I feel like I'm really disappointed in this day and age when my husband will be like, oh, I saw this thing, like this news thing came out. And I was like, yeah, I already opened Reddit this morning. So like, I already saw that literal exact same thing you did. And like, that's what people's experience of the internet is now. Is deep diving on Reddit, A, even possible, and B, like remotely the same as like scraping the internet for weird fan communities where people are like idolizing this kind of thing?
Yeah, I don't even know. In general, I like to try to treat the internet as like a research library, and that's where I find weird stuff. I try to avoid like a social network and do some like, more of a footnote adventure through like old, weird, obsessive like WordPress pages. And this movie, I don't know when the hell I saw it. So the way we arrived at this film, if you're wondering why we were talking about an Academy Award winner last week, and now we're just like into this deep cut from the mid-'80s.
We got you.
The Soviet era animation. Caitlin was like, let's do a Soviet animation or something. Do you remember what you said?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about Soviet era animation because there's other ones too.
Yeah.
They're all weird. Basically, every single Soviet era animation that I like is really creepy for whatever reason. But there's a lot of really cool ones that obviously a lot of people here in the US or other places might not know about, if this isn't something that you've dug super deep into. So maybe there will be more to come, TBD.
Yeah. In fact, I don't even know what ones you were thinking of because I instantly jumped to this one. Probably because I love Ray Bradbury, but I didn't even give you a chance to offer up anymore. And luckily you also knew it. So we just were like,
yeah, I was definitely on board. Once again, our tastes have aligned.
I know. That's why I was extra curious of how we both saw this one, because I mean, the version we're looking at only has like 4,000 views on YouTube. It's only been up for a year, but I would suspect that something like this being tied to Ray Bradbury, who's like maybe one of the top 5 sci-fi storytellers of the Western world, this isn't really like that prominent of a film, but I guess maybe we just run in similar sci-fi dystopian circles and we both got here.
Oh, that's actually funny you say that, though, because I really wasn't familiar with the short story until because you would sometimes talk about the Martian Chronicles being something you really liked. And I was like, I will read this. And so I did. And then I was like, oh, this is like a whole thing.
Yeah.
Like, this is that thing. And I'd kind of forgotten about it completely, honestly, until we talked about it again. Because I've only read that once and I really loved it. And it was really good. Ira obviously highly recommends it. I will highly recommend it. There's a lot of really cool, it's like a short story collection, I guess you would say. There's a ton of awesome stuff in there. It's really weird.
Yeah, it's little vignettes of, I guess, sort of a 50s-ish style future of, stainless steel rocket ships and like aspirational, like wisecracking astronauts. But it's like full of irony. I mean, it's quite dark and very humorous. I guess it's kind of a dark comedy book with like lots of commentary on just American culture. It holds up really well and it's super fun. And also, I'm sure you read it in like a day or two. It's short.
Yeah.
And is referenced more often than you think. Like there's all kinds of like bands that pull from those stories. There's like the Rocket Summer Story is kind of a classic like emo trope that I've seen a bunch of times. So yeah, Martian Chronicles worth reading. But before I want to talk about that story a little bit more and how it deals with like the story and the themes as opposed to how the animation deals with it. But we have to go back all the way to the original inspiration for the short story and this animation, which is the poem There Will Come Soft Rains by Sarah Teasdale, who, of course, like all things, think it just comes back to a woman at the beginning of it all, just like literally everything. But she was the first Pulitzer Prize winner for poetry, which is pretty cool. And that's in 1918.
Yeah, that's awesome. I did not know that.
Yeah, and to me, so can I read the poem? Do you mind?
No, please. By all means.
There Will Come Soft Rains by Sarah Teasdale. There will come soft rains and the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, and frogs in the pools singing at night, and wild plum trees in tumultuous white. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire. And not one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it is done. Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. And spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. Some classic rhyming couplets there.
It's a great job, Sarah.
So that's the poem. And if you watch the animation, the poem is actually read during the credits. So I assume, while it's often credited that the animation is based on the Ray Bradbury story, to me, it's like equally based on this poem.
Yeah, I mean, one of the creepiest things about it is like, that's really old. And then here we are like making, animations based in 2026 about like the horrors of war that we visit on each other and like how little things have changed.
Mm-hmm.
And how it's actually worse, I guess. I mean, in 1918, like we couldn't wipe each other completely off the map.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. This like poem doesn't have like that nuclear consequence, that element. It's like, maybe we've gone too far type of feeling.
Yeah. It was like, the poem is a little bit like, why don't we stop to like appreciate stuff and maybe not kill each other? And now it's like, literally no humans left, possibly. Like, it's kind of scary.
Yeah.
It's just a little scary.
So if we jump a little further ahead, we get to the Ray Bradbury story. And I just pulled a couple elements. I'm not going to read that. You can go on YouTube.
Please read the story. How long is it? I don't really remember offhand, so
It's only a couple pages. It's a 15-minute reading by Leonard Nimoy on YouTube. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I almost went down that watch that today, but I had to do work. So I didn't.
So it goes. Well, it'll be there for you when you're ready.
Yeah, at 2 a.m. tonight, I'll lie in bed listening to the 15-minute version.
Re-listening to this Ray Bradbury story, which it's the first time I've gone through it in probably over 20 years. I probably haven't reread this book in a long time, even though it was kind of one that was like a comfort book for me, which I would go back to a lot when I was younger. But this story does a lot of things that I think about a lot when I'm telling a story. Like it really personifies all the little elements of the whole scenario. So in the animation, you've got like this automated house, and in the Ray Bradbury version, you have all these like kind of cleaning mice that become aggravated when they have to clean up like the dead dog's body. Spoiler for the Ray Bradbury story, there's a dog that dies in it. It's kind of sad.
My cleaning mice hate that too.
There's all these other little elements of like the clock striking insanely in the final moments. And there's this great, as the house burns down, in this version, the house kind of just sets itself aflame, and all the different elements that you've seen automated and with precision throughout the story just sort of destroy themselves. And there's like this tape machine that's reading a poem, and it's just burning and the tape is melting and it's becoming all garbled and weird, which is just like a cool visual. So the Ray Bradbury story just has like this great chaos to it, as everything just sort of like comes undone in the final bits of the story. Whereas the Russian animation we're going to get into is just takes a pretty different approach. It's like devastating and violent, but like in a different way. It's not quite, to me, it's not poetic in the same way that the Ray Bradbury one is.
I think we should just talk about a little bit about the aesthetic. I wish that I knew more. I wish I knew more about basically all of Soviet era animation. My very, very cursory level of research into the provenance of this particular piece did not yield a lot of information in general. So I don't really know, like, why were these movies made? Like this short film or like other movies and like Soviet era movies that I like. I don't know where they came from, honestly. And I don't know who's making them for the most part, besides like the obvious names that are attached, like what's in the credits. Like, I don't know any of the story behind them, but I noticed that a lot of them have this aesthetic where it's almost like paper cut, and like in There Will Come Soft Rains, there's some like kind of grotesque sand animation. I mean, it's really simple, but like what it represents is very foul. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, it's basically like static pieces of artwork that have then been like repositioned frame by frame to create the movement. So it's not, you know, people are drawing each frame Disney style. It's a different thing. It's a little bit more like stop motion-y. And like you said, it's a little bit Terry Gilliam-ish, because that was kind of like the stop motion cut paper style of a Monty Python, except for like sick and twisted. But there's something about the aesthetic of this. Maybe it's just combining the style of that sort of stop motion-y look with this like barren, airbrushed, I don't know. It's just like kind of, there's something about the aesthetic of this short and other shorts like it that is so sickening to me. And it's not like that's not a criticism. I mean, that's a good thing, I think. And it's like part of what makes them stick out to me. But like, there's just something so tortured about it. Like, it feels haunting. And it's not even down to the aesthetic. Like, if you watch this, the only voice that you really hear is the voice of this robot, this house robot.
You mean this one?
Oh, God. Like, that shit haunts me. Imagine that, watching that in the warmth of your childhood bed at 2 a.m. on Christmas, and just like freaking yourself out for no good reason because you're an idiot. I don't know. It makes me feel sick. Like, I legitimately feel sick in my stomach hearing that and like watching this stuff. And totally. But it's really cool and like so powerful. But also, like, what sane family would be like, yes, I want to wake up this way every morning. I want this fucking thing to rouse me from my slumber every day. I don't think so. Like, we're gonna get like a Siri voice for our House Robot, because like, fuck that. But they all have that energy. What is the deal with that?
I believe this film is originally associated with Uzbek films, which is like a really old studio from, I guess, Soviet Russia. It's like a Turkish speaking, I guess it's another country.
Yeah,
right?
Wikipedia claims, which is very shallow, but it claims that it's in Uzbekistan.
I mean, I guess what we don't understand is what their audience was exactly for this work, because listening to you describe this film, it's more like you're describing an art piece than entertainment to be played on television. Like, it's extremely evocative in a distressing way to like evoke an idea that's not necessarily pleasant, right? And that's not really something we expect from like Western animation, because usually when we engage with the animation, it's something that's supposed to like appeal and be charming. Like, that's the formula we're familiar with. So maybe part of it's that, because I feel the same way you do. And I guess maybe it's just the way our taste buds are developed towards a certain look when we watch an animated movie.
Well, and I love it too, because like, this is the kind of shit I wish I could show like American executives or whatever and be like, you really want to freak people out. Like,
true.
Animation is not just for kids. Take this, for example. Like, let me take you on a journey to how this can make you feel in a really messed up way. But on the same note of what you were saying of like, why did they make this or who is the audience? It is kind of funny because this film makes me feel like it was made to be found on the internet in the middle of the night.
Totally.
In really bad quality. Like, it doesn't feel like it was made to be seen any other way, which is so interesting.
Yeah, that's part of the joy, is the weird discovery of this sort of thing. And that's kind of like, that's why I was so excited to do this one. I'm like, oh yeah, let's talk about a weird thing nobody's really seen. Like, you kind of have just had to have come across it. Nobody's going to put this on a list of like Vulture's top 100 animated films of all time. Like, I don't think this is on there.
Except for us. We would do that.
Yeah, it's definitely on our top 100 at this point. At least number 13.
At least.
No, I love this for the reasons you're describing, that it's so weird, and it reminds you of like that there's a bigger spectrum of storytelling available to animation than what we're constantly seeing and unfortunately often just being sold. And like, I think sometimes when we're frustrated with a cartoon, we're like, oh, this is what you're doing. There's like so much you could be doing. For example, this weird thing. Like, take a bit of that and bring it to your, I don't know, your Pixar movie. And maybe they will now. Maybe Pete Docter never saw this movie, but somebody in this like new vanguard.
I have it on good authority. All the Pixar execs are listening to our podcast. Asterisk, no, they are not. They definitely aren't. But if you are, you should do something like this. It's totally viable in today's market. Just a quick recap of this film. Although, again, if you haven't seen it, so we'll link it, and it's about 10 minutes long. It's like a little over 10 minutes. So pretty breezy. All of this short takes place inside a suburban house in Allendale, California. So close to home. Not for us, but, you know, America, whatever. Is a nice little American suburb, presumably, with a nice little American suburban family. But you find out pretty early on that nobody's home. So I guess you would say like the protagonist of this film is the house robot, which is this horrific creature of metal and tubing that comes out of the ceiling. And I guess all of the house is automated, but you would assume that this thing is masterminding everything. Like, it's the home base of the computer system, because there's this kitchen table and this breakfast is happening. There's like eggs all around, and I guess like coffee or tea is like, it's all being automatically prepared with like no human presence whatsoever. And the robot is in just absolutely the most horrific voice possible, conceivable, is going around to each of the rooms in the house saying, it's 7 a.m, you know, it's time to get up. It's time to get to work. And we get to see how all of the residents of the home, the McClellan family, have been vaporized in their beds and are fully deceased. So that's the husband and wife, 2 kids, I think. I believe you might even be able to tell it's like a boy and a girl. And then Mrs. McClellan, who presumably is like a grandma of one of the, I mean, maybe the husband's mom. So this robot is just going about its business like it's none the wiser. And you can look out these like windows that I'm assuming this is like a nuclear winter that's happening outside. Because it's just ceaselessly snowing. Again, we know this is California. And the climax, I guess you could say, of this film is when a dove appears in the window. And then you realize that this house has got an extremely advanced security system because the robot completely loses it. It asks the dove for a password. Dove can't talk. Dove is just a normal dove. And it panics and all the windows start sealing so the dove can't escape and the robot just goes nuts and it's like trying to murder this dove and it's smashing the home and it knocks its eyes out. It has these like horrific panels, I guess, where you would assume these eyes are, and it's blinded and it's doing this awful thing where it's like running into walls. It's terrible. And long story short, great news. The dove manages to escape out of a hole that's been punctured in the wall. But the robot doesn't know that because it can't see anything, and it attacks where it thinks that the dove is, triggering, I guess, what appears to be a nuclear explosion. So the dove probably didn't get far enough outside the blast range to survive. Well, I don't know. Does it come back at the end? I think it does, though. You would presume.
It lives.
I think it's more of a metaphorical dove that returns at the end. Or we're left to wonder, how nuclear the explosion really was. But the dove starts the turntable that Miss McClellan has on her little side table in her room. But it plays this discordantly cheerful tune as we, have the credits roll. And then we're treated to a rendition of Sarah Teasdale's poem.
Just to ward off depression while you were telling that story, I imagined you were on like one of those NPR style The Moth podcasts, like doing like a story from my childhood. And this was that story.
It was. Yeah, this all happened to me, actually. But it was in Oklahoma.
One of those days,
Yeah, every day in Oklahoma is like this, except for nobody ever made me my breakfast in the morning. That's not true. That sounds like I'm like shitting on my parents. Like people made me breakfast sometimes. I'm just, not every day.
Yeah, I mean, they got other things going on. Like eventually you got to learn to make your own breakfast. Not like in this magical future world where you have a big robot snake just terrorizing you constantly throughout your day.
It's so prominent as well. It's so massive and aggressive. And I noted this. I did not note this in my recap, but it also... so we see breakfast at the beginning, but it also happens to be New Year's Eve.
Yes.
And to celebrate New Year's, and this is like during the period where the dove is out like raising hell in this unsuspecting suburban home, terrorizing this robot. Mm-hmm. Like a full like turkey dinner, I guess, comes up in there, and I'm like, dang, that we really automated that. Like that's very impressive. How long have these people been dead? I guess it's not clear.
Well, I suspect, one thing before we talk about death and nuclear holocaust, the dates. So this one's New Year's, as you said, 2026. The Ray Bradbury story is August 5th, 2026, which I guess is like an anniversary almost to the day of like the Hiroshima bombing. So I don't know why they changed it to New Year's, other than I guess it's a nice setting because did they play what's the song
it's the Star Spangled Banner, isn't it?
Yeah, okay, it's just the Star Spangled Banner. I guess it's like their interpretation, like Russian interpretation of American New Year's is we listen to the Star Spangled Banner and have a turkey dinner. Doesn't sound that bad, I guess.
On New Year's, yeah, I've never had a New Year's that chill, honestly. That sounds great. I would love to normalize staying home and eating a turkey dinner on New Year's.
Yeah, it's just an interesting change. I guess maybe Russia doesn't. Yeah, I mean, this is all speculation because it's a director we don't really know anything about to guess why they changed the day. But it's evocative. I mean, it works for the story. And also, like, makes the winter questionable. You're like, oh, is this nuclear winter? Like, you don't really know that until we see the outside, which happens, not quite halfway through, but that reveal doesn't come till later.
I guess my feeling as I was watching it was like, this celebratory, it's New Year's, like whatever. And I'm like, there is no more New Year's. So, and I think that just like helps kind of drive home the point even more, is like, nobody is celebrating. Like, it's over. There is no New Year anymore. It's not even 2027. It's not anything. Like, nobody's around to mark the time. You know, like if humans all died now, like what year actually is it? Like the only way we know what year it is like because we decided what years are and like when they started.
Right. Yeah. Time has no meaning in this story. Nothing has any meaning in this story, really.
Much like real life.
Yeah. It's like kind of all the scenes are memorable, though. Like as you were reading the plot, I kind of relived the whole animation. That might be part of the fact that it is such a simple animation style where we're not like seeing a lot of frames of change. So like if there's a composition, it's on the screen for quite a while where you really soak it in, which is probably part of the impact of this. Like, you know, it's not cut in a modern way. It's like quite slow. It's just paper sliding around the screen for the most part.
Yeah. And we don't go anywhere really. For the most part, it's like several rooms in one house and kind of like the main room. But yeah, and it's all like lingering, like on the kids' room, and there's all these like kids' toys in there, and then the remains of the children.
And I wonder how they decided to, you know, invest, quote unquote, in actual cell animation, because it's really only, we see it in the egg, that great opening shot of that egg being cracked. All their money went into that. And then
Sakuga.
Yes, exactly. And then the ashes of the bodies as they're poured out of their bed chambers into their shoes, as the ashes of the small girl are poured into her little like white tennis sneakers. So you know, horrible. There's some animation. That's nice.
Yeah, like I think that is sand animation, but I didn't realize until like when I first watched this, I thought it was like hand drawn. But watching it now, it like really looks like it was like, you know, camera mounted, looking down, and somebody was like hand kind of stop motioning this sand into these little piles to great effect, to very haunting effect.
Yeah, I mean, talk about texture. Like this animation is full of texture. And I feel like that's something I keep bringing up. Maybe I didn't really realize this in myself, but
Ira loves texture.
I guess I love it, or sometimes I hate it. I just emotionally respond to it. Like, to me, that's part of when you say something is kind of garish or weird. It usually has to do with like the texture of it, right? Because that like evokes your other senses. Like when I look at the sand, I'm like, ooh, I can like feel the grittiness of that in my mouth.
Yeah, it's a huge part of aesthetic in general and like how you feel about it. Because I even feel that way about, like, it's that smoothness, like the airbrushing or whatever they did to paint these backgrounds and like the texture of the robot, which is so evocative of this type of animation to me. Something I've seen in other Soviet stuff, like, and also just of the time. So like 50s, 60s, like sci-fi art had a lot of that. But it's just, yeah, I mean, it takes you to a certain vibe. I was going to say time or place, but it's not always that. But in this case, yeah, I mean, it really dates it. Not in a bad way, but yeah, it establishes, you know, what its inspirations are.
Now, the lore of this story is basically the way reveals happen through the plot, because there's really no character to follow. So I was just kind of thinking about what makes you keep watching this if you're not like investing in a character. It's basically because you want to have certain questions answered. And I think the story is a little redundant. I almost, not to judge a 10-minute movie for being too long, but it really pushes certain points home like over and over again, like the way we see like different versions of bodies, you know, in ash form and just like the different meals. I'm like, oh, there's like a little lag before we get to the bird that I'm just like, okay, I think we get it. And I wonder if that's a bit of it just being like dated, maybe in 1984, people in the audience in Russia didn't know this story. So maybe it was kind of like compelling in a different way. But I remember being like slightly bored around the middle of this movie.
That's funny. I mean, I definitely wasn't. But again, watching it in pitch black at 2 a.m., I was like mostly just haunted and like torturing myself.
Yeah.
But I get what you're saying. Like it is, when I checked the run time, I was like, it's 10 minutes? Like I remember it being like 5. And yeah, it's a lot of such deliberate, slow pacing. I think it's one of those things, again, we can only speculate because we don't know the actual audience or like where this ended up or like why it was made in the first place. But it reminds me of like when you make indie stuff, you're shooting from the hip a little bit. And so sometimes you make creative decisions, I imagine, because you're trying for a specific tone or a specific feeling, but you don't have a million years or like the budget to workshop it or refine it. It's sometimes you just go, and then you make it. And the slow pacing of it to me feels very like a deliberate part of the tone, like in how creepy it is and kind of this, it's a mystery, right? So like there's some big reveals in it. And I think that the intention would be like we're leading up to this, like these long shots so that you are like in suspense, which I think totally works, but then does, like in now times, makes it feel weirdly long because we wouldn't make it like that now, probably.
Yeah, I guess this style of sci-fi is so ubiquitous now. Like it's packed full of tropes, like all of these little ironies we've seen like a million times. They've like filtered down to like a Rick and Morty episode. I've never seen that show, but I'm sure there's an episode that like has some of this stuff in it because it's like, it's just fodder for sci-fi content. Like especially the grandmother's chair scene where we have like the window and you look out it and you're like, oh, it's a beautiful day. And you like respond to that at first. But then in the back of your mind, you're like, wait, no, it's not. I saw out a broken window earlier that it was like snowing. But maybe this is actually true. You're almost like caught up in the illusion for a second before, of course, like the screen turns off and the window comes up and like there's the reality outside. Yeah,
it's like a Back to the Future window. Like it's not really the actual window, but that is one of my favorite parts of this though, I think, where it's like you see the dead parents, you see the dead kids, and then it goes to this nice room where the person in the chair like clearly died sitting in this chair because there's a little ash pile in there. But like the table is kind of set with all these like what I could only describe as like old person knickknacks. Mm-hmm. There's like a porcelain statue of a girl and like that kind of stuff. And then like the turntable's playing this like really sweet sounding like throwback song. It very much feels like a Fallout trailer or something. Like if you've ever seen a trailer for like one of the Fallout games, like they always play those old like the, ink spots or whatever. It's like that. And it's like, everything's fine, but really we're in this dystopian thing. And it's even like they sell the illusion of the window really well because there's like a curtain blowing in this like fake breeze, and the curtain is actually just like part of the illusion. Like there is no curtain on this window.
I know.
I was like, and it goes on long enough. It's one of those instances where I think the slow pacing is working, is when that part goes on long enough for it to occur to you. Like for you to have time to realize that can't possibly be what's actually outside. And then they reveal to you that, like this window is fake. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a cool moment.
Yeah, it's good. And the snake, snake robot seems really invested in the grandma because later he, with his like creepy little like tendrily finger mouth, he kind of like pulls the blanket across her. Like he's quite a tender robot for being a nightmare machine, basically. But it's just interesting to try to imagine the design choices of this. Like, is that moment ironic, or is this thing not quite as creepy to a Russian in 1984 as it is to an American in 2021? It's hard to bridge that gap and understand, which is part of the fun, weird mystery of watching this whole thing.
I know. I'm curious what you have to say about this, but I kind of want to just arbitrarily share my reading of it. Well, I guess what's fun about this, like us not being able to find a lot of backstories because we get to like spend a little more time just filling in the blanks ourselves. Mm-hmm. But like, I kind of wonder, I just inherently am like, this is probably anti-American, which I think is really reasonable and makes a lot of sense for it to be an anti-American thing. And it feels very, you know, aggressive in that way at times where like this robot pierces a crucifix of Jesus and then he falls to the floor. Like that's very like, oh, okay, like message received.
Yeah.
But I wonder if like the automation is so creepy and overwrought, and like something that happens a few times in this film is the chairs or the beds that the people are sitting in will raise, and like basically like if somebody's laying in bed, the robot will come in and be like, it's 7 a.m. like get up, you need to go. And the bed just like flips up, and that's how the ashes will like run out and like fill the shoes of the people. Yeah. But it makes you think like, damn, like if you hadn't got up in time, would that thing be just dumping you out on the floor? Like everything is run on this like such extensive automation that like nothing is left to chance. Like it's almost too much. And it makes me think that this is like Americans are just like, all we do is like want things to be taken care of.
Yeah.
And we kind of like built this society that is so pointless and stupid, and like we don't do anything for ourselves anymore. That's just kind of like how and I have no idea if that's part of, you know, what they intended to say, but it being so like American, and so like we're playing the Star Spangled Banner at New Year's and there's like a little American flag like stuck in the turkey dish and stuff like that. Like it feels like they've got us in their sights.
Totally. Yeah. It's almost like mocking, because surely this artist like knows or could have researched a little bit more about America to like add some subtlety, but it seems like it's just intentionally mocking.
Yeah, it feels very intentional to me.
What it means to be like an American in like California, USA. And I wonder if it's also maybe a commentary on like our industry as well, because like the machines we choose to make, like they're so large and clunky and overindulgent that they make us the cogs in their own machine, which I guess is like another irony of it. It's like the humans have no agency in this home. It's like it's going to work whether you're in it or not. It's like we've just out invented our usefulness altogether. Like we're just things that sleep and eat.
Yeah, like one thing that really underlines that to me is when they do play the Star Spangled Banner at the dinner, the chairs all like automate so like that you would be standing. So the implication is that like it's New Year's, the anthem is playing, so everybody will stand at dinner in like respect of this moment.
Yeah. Which
is like, damn. But I think that's that. It's like Americans just go along with everything, and we sort of built ourselves this golden cage so we don't have to think about stuff or go outside. Like have real windows to outside even, although it presumably was really nice out before the nuclear holocaust.
You know, something else is I want to talk about the ultimate visual metaphor, the white dove, in a minute. But
yeah, that's when you're like, oh, subtlety. No thanks. Not for me.
Maybe we'll conclude on the white dove thoughts. But before we get there, something that is new in my thinking of this movie that hadn't like occurred to me before, because like some of this stuff just comes through your brain as you're like, oh, I'm an art student, like of course I think about all these things. But now being older and more invested in like the Disney theme parks of my youth, I'm like, you know what this feels a little bit like? It almost feels like the carousel of progress in a way, like the way we're kind of like shifting through these little vignettes of the day and seeing the way they work, and they will just always work in the way that like when you go to the Carousel of Progress, it's basically a museum for like a certain era of like theme park history and like automation and, you know, mechanical animation. So I was just getting a little bit of that from this. I wonder if it's kind of nudgingly aware of like American progress and the kind of like Disney ideal of that. I mean, this guy's an animator. He's probably seen some Disney movies.
Yeah, you would assume. That is interesting.
I get a little, just visually, I get a little H.R. Geiger from this too, especially we get a shot of the outside. There seems to be like a little bit of biomechanical elements. It's so when you see the outside world, there seems to be like some vein-like tubes running across the ground. Who knows what this future California is really like? And then the robot itself, when its eye plates are broken, it just oozes like organs, which is pretty sweet. I like it.
Honestly, aesthetically, I think it's great.
I don't know what it means, but...
Yeah, it's a great fucking visual. Honestly, I think what it is to me, again, if I could just read the tea leaves and talk about my personal feelings about this, based on absolutely nothing. But like, I didn't realize until that point when the eyes get knocked out that those are supposed to be eyes. Because it's just this big, like, huge unit. And it has sort of like finger-like claw things on the bottom. So it all sort of, it has a little bit of like, oh, it's kind of like a face, but it's not really. So I just wasn't thinking about it in those terms. But when its eyes shatter, it's just, yeah, it's like moldy slime ooze, but there's also like, it almost feels a little veiny or something. There's like texture of organ in there. But I love that they did that because obviously, again, it's just another unsubtle thing, first of all, to be like, the machine is like blind with rage and then thereby kills itself. Like, yeah, no, that's very accurate. But to have it be like meat inside, it's just more of it being like, this is what it's really about. Okay. Like, you are the robot. You know, It looks like a robot on the outside, but like what's in there is like us, I guess. Or like that's, you know, it's made of meat.
Yeah, it's a meat machine. And it's also, I guess, you know, in animation, there's the urge to personify objects constantly. And this is a really dark, gross version of that. Because the poem does it originally too, even though there's no machinery in it. It ends with the, and spring herself when she woke at dawn. You know, spring is a thing that you could like wave to if you wanted to. And this robot snake is kind of like the inversion of that. It's like, oh yeah, that robot snake was alive just as much as you or I.
And it looks like it's crying.
So this dove wreaks havoc, as you mentioned earlier. So it's an element of chaos, clearly.
You really feel bad for it, honestly. You really get the idea that like from the dove's perspective, it's like, oh shit. I shouldn't have come here. Like, oh God, as it's trying to get out.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, you have like the horrific tone of the actual film. Just like this stuff did not intend to find itself in this predicament.
And the logic of, I mean, I guess this is where the animation jumps the shark a little bit, because the snake loses control completely just because the dove doesn't know the password and nobody like flips the security switch. So the snake's like, password, the dove's like, no. And then it just destroys everything. And I guess this house is run on like nuclear fission or something, because then we just cut to a giant nuclear explosion. It's kind of it's not a gag ending, obviously, but if you just think for a second why these events play out as they do in this kind of like not quite the last moment of the story, but this like, the climactic battle, I guess it's just strange to think about what's going on behind the scenes here.
Yeah, I think this is the point where it like what's happening on screen is a poem or like a metaphor, and it's not, because even the first half of this, you're like, yes, this is a suburban house. All the people are dead and there was a nuclear war. And then at this point, it's really just them being like, actually, this is what this is about. And it's about how Americans like, at even the thought of like approaching the world in a peaceful manner, just couldn't do it and then eat themselves alive, like to a nuclear conclusion, because we're just like rabid dogs, I guess. And I think that's not invalid of a sentiment.
The beautiful rural window returns, and then the dove just continues to crash itself against the window, trying to escape to this like idyllic landscape. That's just like a sad thing to say. And it happens for so long. Talking about timing, I guess I should appreciate that a little more. But like this goes on like 7 or 8 times. It shows this dove like banging against the window to really hammer home the point that out of freedom is an illusion or the pursuit of peace.
I would say honestly what it's saying, because I feel like that This is almost like the most optimistic take on this story, where the poem is just like, if we all die, doesn't really matter. This one to me is almost like a warning. Like, if the dove can't go through the wind, it's like there's a point at which it's too late. So, like, you should not fuck everything up before there isn't a peaceful, idyllic landscape to go to. Like, you need to get on that now before you blow it all up, which we are not good at. So, TBD on that. By my count, we have 5 years to figure this out before 2026.
Yeah, so set your alarm, everyone.
Set your robot. Honestly, don't get a house robot. It's historically never been a good idea. Like, show me one situation in fiction or reality where that was a good call. Smart House, iconic Disney Channel original film, bad idea. Doesn't end well. That's like the most mild case. We weren't meant to have these.
And the night was young.
As we close the chapter on American history, we're going to do a little epilogue here on dystopian stories. Some of our, not necessarily our top 3 dystopian stories. They're not even necessarily animated or films, but we feel it would be fun for the second half of the show to be a little bit about stories like the one we just watched. So Caitlin and I have both picked 3. There's a little overlap, so maybe there's some shifting around, so we have 6 altogether because we're just on the same goddamn page half the time, which makes our conversations redundant, I'd say.
This podcast only has one host, and
yeah, let's just alternate weeks.
By the time it's over, it's going to be a mystery fiction podcast where the audience has to figure out which one of us is the real person and which one of us is like the simulacrum who doesn't actually exist. It's exactly like WandaVision, obviously.
The budget is the same too.
Yes.
Extraordinary.
As you can tell.
Okay. You want to go with your pick first, or should I start? I have a really old one. Should I do an ancient one first?
Yes, that sounds perfect to me.
We'll go chronological, which is suited because my first choice is The Time Machine by H.G. Wells.
Oh, yeah, no, that is perfect.
Yeah. So, from 1895-ish, I think. Definitely late 1890s. And I remember because here's a little story. When I was in middle school, my family had just moved to upstate New York, and my dad had bought this really old, shitty farmhouse that was so shitty we couldn't live in it. So he was fixing it up, and we were staying in this house owned by this old woman named Isabel, and she was about 90 years old at the time I knew her. So this house was filled with ancient relics, and one of those relics was a bunch of old comic books from the 50s. There was a series called Classics Illustrated, which they're still around. Like, you'll find them in school libraries, and they are basically adaptations of famous literature. Like, you could read A Little Women, Classics Illustrated, or Moby Dick, and it would be like 30 pages long, and you'd get the gist of it. And I had a Time Machine one, which was really fun because I'd known the story. It's just one of those stories that's just out there. Like, if you've never seen or read The Time Machine, you probably kind of know it. But of course, in the comic book, you get the cool art and the visualization of the Time Machine itself. So it doesn't look like a DeLorean or anything. It's more like a leather armchair with a big satellite attached to the back and a bunch of kind of steampunk knobs and handles. So I love looking at the picture of the Time Machine in this comic book, and I would read it a lot. So it's just one of those stories that stuck with me. And I'll just give a little bit of the plot for anybody that's not familiar with the Time Machine. Caitlin, was this a thing you've encountered in your life?
I have read the Time Machine. I don't remember. It actually is a little frustrating to me that I remember the subpar, mediocre kind of film adaptation a lot better than I do the book.
Yeah, the Guy Pearce one.
It had Jeremy Irons was the bad guy. I remember that at the end. And There was something about the visuals of that movie that really like just glommed onto my childhood subconscious to where I can like picture it very clearly. And I feel like the time machine in that movie looked kind of cool, but that's all I don't remember a lot of the plot.
I assume they used the design from, these old versions, because I'm sure even in one of the editions of the book, there's an illustration that looks kind of like the one I described. So it's just sort of this like iconic time machine look. Now, the story is about a time traveler, and it's one of those novels that's basically a framed story. So he's telling the story of how he went back in time, because nobody fucking believes him. Because like, why should a man from, the 19th century be allowed and capable of traveling through time? It's simply impossible. But of course he proves it in the end because he brought back some stupid artifact of some sort. But he takes his time machine for some reason to the year, it's like 800,000 AD or some ridiculous number, some deep set future. Yeah. And he arrives at a paradise, like a biblical paradise like Earth. And he meets these elfish humanoid people that are called Eloi.
Morlocks? Is that what it is?
Well, no. First he meets the Eloi, who are like the nice ones.
That's why I was like, I only remember these from the movie and like barely that.
Yeah. And, they're kind and attractive. So, of course, he's like on board with this. And then his time machine is stolen by the Morlocks, who lived a disgraced existence underground.
Yeah, those are the bad guys, and the Eloi are like tunnels. The people.
Yeah. I mean, they're both like technically people, I guess. I don't think they come to any other understanding. The Morlocks are very monsterish. I don't think they're ever really redeemed. They're just savages, and that's bad. Because this is probably like a book of manners, it's like one mustn't live underground, like to away from like they're not civilized. Not that the Eloi, they're just they're very naive. So I guess it's sort of like polarizing aspects of human existence. And the time traveler comes and sits right there in the middle, and he goes on these adventures. And I think he falls in love with one of the Eloi. He fights off the Morlocks, he gets his time machine back, and he returns home. So it's a happy ending. So it's just a classic H.G. Wells, adventure story, there and back again type of deal. I felt like it was a good jumping off point because it's like a vision of the future, like so far ahead of our time that you couldn't even imagine. But it's pretty imaginable.
It's also probably like the most optimistic one that we're going to talk about, I have to imagine, because most of the ones that I'm like,
yeah,
I don't know. I kind of was thinking like, am I like looking for like dystopian / post-apocalyptic stuff, of which we're both drawn to, I guess. So they're fairly bleak.
Yeah, let's get a little darker because my other ones are either humorous or dark. So what do you got?
I guess mine are all pretty dark, sort of. I don't know. If I'm going to go loosely in chronological order, then my next one would be Roadside Picnic.
Oh, yeah.
Which I was recommended by a friend. I'd never heard of it, which is weird because I sort of feel like I've circled around it in my life in other ways. But it's this, appropriately, a Soviet-Russian novel by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, published in 1972. And it is the basis, if you are familiar with Andrei Tarkovsky's movie Stalker. I guess that movie was loosely based on this novel. I haven't seen that either, but it was like, it's one of those movies that I was just talking to you about this. That like, you're always like, I'm going to watch this, like, and then just have it because the runtime is so long and it's a little like, when is the appropriate time to like sit down and watch this movie? But it's also a little bit like, one of my known faves, Jeff Vandermeer's books, like the Annihilation or the Area X trilogy, has big stalker / roadside picnic vibes. Which is kind of cool. And I'm actually going to talk about a different Jeff Vandermeer thing later as one of my other picks, but not Annihilation, although it is good. But Roadside Picnic is it really like knocked my socks off a little bit when I read it. And I hadn't read it before it was sometime in the last year. I don't remember because time is over. But sometime in the last year, and I was looking for something to read, and I was really struggling with reading stuff just because the pandemic really made it hard for me to focus on books for some reason. And this is one that I just like barreled through when I picked it up. Mm-hmm. And the basic premise is that there's been an alien visitation on Earth, essentially first contact, although nobody did contact the aliens. I don't think any human person met them, at least lived to tell the tale. But the story is all sort of in the aftermath of that. So the aliens have visited Earth in 6 different places all at the same time. And those areas where they visited are totally changed and in really kind of horrifying ways. Like they've just left these weird artifacts or debris, like different elements in these places that people can't comprehend and are frequently lethal. And the main character, his name is Red Shuart, is what they would call stalkers, which are basically people who illegally go into these zones when they're not supposed to steal stuff and sell it. So this character will go in and steal this, like, there's like hell slime is something that the characters colloquially call this stuff that they find out there. And one of the characters' like partners, I guess, or sort of like employer to go do this is with him on one of these excursions. And he steps in the hell slime and it just dissolves his leg bones like instantly. And then he has to get him out and like get him to a surgeon without being caught by police. A lot of really wild stuff happens in this. It's super creepy. There are like the way that the author describes things in this book is really, it just felt very different to me. Like I felt when I was reading this book, like this doesn't remind me of something else really in the way that it's written. It feels very unique and like of its own thing. It was very captivating to me. And just like by the time it ends, I was totally devastated because it's really sad. I mean, this character is in kind of like a poverty sort of a situation. Like everybody's kind of not doing well. That's why you end up in these situations where you're going into this illegal zone that permanently alters your genetic stuff. Because another whole like sidebar of the plot is that this guy has a kid with his girlfriend, like he accidentally gets her pregnant, and the child comes out like covered in hair and like full body hair, and slowly as she gets older loses the ability to talk and becomes like less and less human. There's also like people in cemeteries that are near these zones start just coming home. And like they're never, that's all kind of window dressing in a way. Like there's obviously more stuff going on here, but some of the stuff is just slipped in there and you're like, wait, what? Like what the fuck? And I just don't want to give too much of it away basically because
yeah, totally.
It's such a home run for me. This book is so freaking good. Everybody should read it. But yeah, if you are into this kind of thing, you know, if you're wanting some new thing that you haven't read or watched, definitely I would recommend this one, probably at the top of the list.
Trying to describe how I felt reading it, and it's been a while, but I remember getting a very noir type of vibe from the character and the way he interacts with the world. Like it's the way the visitations and you know, we enters the zones and brings back these like mysterious artifacts. I remember it feeling very...
Can't even describe it.
Like first off, when you're going into these sections, like all these little artifacts, they kind of evoke their own story. Like there's almost like a million different books jammed in this one book because it's like so full of interesting ideas that I almost don't even know where a lot of them come from because they're just like unanswered elements.
Yeah.
It's like someone made a list of like sci-fi story plots and then they're just like distributed across these zones. And then this sort of like destitute, I think he's even a drunk, right? Maybe that's the noir vibe I'm recalling.
But he does spend a lot of time like in bars, like talking about people that he's going to meet or like meeting different people. And yeah, it's like he's not ever trying to solve a mystery exactly, but it feels like he's always looking for answers.
Yeah, and he's always kind of dealing with the police, right? They're just sort of it's something you wouldn't see in a lot of sci-fi, at least at this time. I'm sure this book has inspired like a fleet of writers in this like subgenre of science fiction, but it's like hard-boiled science fiction or something. So if you're into stuff like that, yeah, totally. Like this book is just one of those things you wish you could make something like it.
Absolutely. And it just has this desperation to it throughout that is like, in a world where we've experienced a lot of dystopian sci-fi stories like that, this one felt like really devastating to me, just in its like laying bare kind of like the human condition of being in the society that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, desperation is probably like kind of a running theme through some of these stories at different levels of desperation.
Pretty cool.
All right, so you got a book from 72 or 71-ish. I'm going to go with Fantastic Planet, which is a French animated film from 1973 that hopefully we can do an episode about. And I'm not even going to look at your face to see if you've like seen this or not. I'm going to talk about it. Oh, you haven't?
I haven't seen it. That's
right,
another one where I'm like, I'm going to watch this, and then I never do.
This will be a fun one to do someday. And I am very familiar with this movie because as a youth, another youth story, these are all nostalgic for me. This is the stuff I grew up with.
That's funny. None of mine are. All of mine are ones I like experienced recently.
That's good. We're getting the whole like broad spectrum here. So Fantastic Planet was given to me on a VHS tape by a friend of my dad's from Kansas. And he would always mail me books. I think he worked for like a union that was associated with libraries or something, because he would always send me discarded library books. I had all kinds of weird stuff, just like no consistent themes, just like kids lit adult stuff from all over. And he also sent me movies sometimes. And one of them was this weird experimental adult animated film from the 70s, directed by René Laloux, I believe is how you say it. And it's a kid's movie in that you're not scarred at the end of it, but it definitely feels like it's made for adults. There, I believe, is some animated nudity in it, but it's not like sexy. It's just more artistic. The themes are pretty complicated. So basically the setup here is it is the distant future, no big surprise. And we're on another planet called Yagam. That's the translation.
I'm with you so far.
And we're with these big blue humanoid type of creatures called drags. And in the context of a human, they're monstrous. Like we fit in the palm of their hand. And Earthlings have been brought to their planet as novelty. So we are basically pets to them, and they call us ohms. And we live in their homes. We wear little like collars that keep us, under wraps, like they suppress our abilities to escape. By that, I mean run away. I don't know why I took the long way around explaining that, but
you know how we keep dogs on leashes to suppress their ability to escape?
So basically the behind the scenes of my mind is me like being a kid watching this movie and me also trying to explain the plot to you right now. So it's quite a journey going on in my brain as I describe this film. So the drags are basically our oppressors, and we've been taken away from our planet. And we focus the story on one little ohm named Ter, who's an orphan child. His mother was killed in a battle because the drags like put us on these little mutated alien, like dinosaur looking creatures and make us fight. And so like humans are also always forced to like kill each other for their entertainment. And this mom is killed and her orphan son is adopted by a child drag. So the drag girl that adopts Ter is nice to a degree, but of course, the human wants to escape. So Ter runs away and he takes with him the drag's educating band, which is like this thing they put on their forehead that like communicates their like culture and history. So the ohms use it to enlighten themselves and take back their agency. And the story goes from there. So it's pretty cool. I mean, like just that description, you can hear the kind of like classic sci-fi tropes within it. So I think this is another one of those like heavily inspirational pieces. The art style is very cool. It's very angular and surrealist. So it's pretty grounded. Like there's death and like the physics of the world are very clear, but there's also like an odd surrealism kind of like spiritual element, like when the characters put on their headpieces and learn history in these like hyper fashion like montages, it gets very like Be Here Now, surreal, weird 70s-ish. So high recommend. This is an easy one to find, and it's pretty straightforward. It's a fun adventure basically with just like deeper, very 70s sci-fi themes built into it.
Yeah, it looks to me, I always imagine just looking at the art of it, that it would make me feel similarly to how There Will Come Soft Rains makes me feel.
In that the animation style is similar, like it's kind of cut out stop motion style, but it's not nearly as dark. The characters have soft, friendly voices. There's definitely a hard edge to it because characters are cruel to each other when you kind of don't want them to be, but it's well done. It's definitely has a good positive ending too. So, but the journey there is like pretty raw in terms of animation.
Yeah, well, I look forward to encountering this finally.
Yeah, we'll put it on the docket for someday. I think we could have a good time with this one when we're ready to dip back into a dystopia. Might be a ways off, but someday.
Okay, so it's back to me. I'm gonna make a hard pivot. And then I'll have two really, really brief honorable mentions at the end where we don't actually have to like talk about them. But
okay,
ones that I was like really close to picking and then didn't. So if I'm still going, now I got to check dates, make sure I'm in my chronological order.
I don't know if that's
it's required.
Truly a requirement, but
okay.
It is not. Yeah, you're right.
This is all working out. So my second one I'm going to say is a book that I read when for a couple of years I like was running this book club. It was just like an online book club and it was all with other motion designers, but we didn't do motion design stuff. We would just have a rotating book pick, and whatever. And it ended up largely being sci-fi novels for whatever reason. And we read The Power by Naomi Alderman, which is a book that came out in 2016. Mine are all books.
Cool.
This one is really interesting. It's been a little bit since I did read it, so I'm a little hazy on some of the inner details, but I really liked it a lot. And it also freaked me out. We had a really good book club discussion after it. But the premise of this book, the basic plot premise is that women around the world start getting this ability. And it's inexplicable. Nobody knows where this power is coming from or why it happens. It almost seems like it's just like waking up in you if you're like a biological like human female. Basically to kill people with your hands. I don't know how to describe it. Like you're not choking them to death, but like it's sort of like an electric power, I guess. And how that changes society. That's kind of the basic plot synopsis. And the second aspect of it that's kind of interesting is that it's framed in this way. It opens with, people writing letters to each other about a story. So you're like, oh, like, what's this about? And then by the time you get to the end of the book, it's obvious that the contents of the book are like the past. It's written as it's like our present, like modern day, like human times. But really, by the time you get to the end, it's sort of like I think Handmaid's Tale does this too, where it has this sort of reflection on like the ancient history.
Yeah.
And the people who are writing back and forth to each other sort of at the beginning and throughout this book are far future historians who are looking back on our society now. And it's kind of funny because by the time you get to the end and you're reading these researchers or like scientists that are writing to each other, they're like, look at all this like archaeological evidence of this old society, aka our society, and puzzling over any indication that it was like a patriarchal society. Because I guess at this point, we've hit an apocalyptic scenario where women take over. Mm-hmm. And like, there's these funny mentions at the end that they're like, yeah, like in one archaeological dig, we found all these evidence that like men used to be the warriors, but like that can't possibly be accurate. That has to be like in these really niche communities, because as we all know, like women are the ones who are dangerous. And it's kind of interesting because it plays with these dynamics of like, if women had this capability physically to kill easily, kind of like how physically men can do that now, like, would they become aggressive in the same way? Like, is it about having access to power? And it was really interesting for me because I'm like very small. And I've been like physically terrified in, you know, situations out in the world as like a human. And I would just love the ability to not have to worry about that kind of thing. That would be so cool. So when you're reading this book, you know, if you're, you know, someone like me who is small and not super beefy in any capacity, you're like, yeah, no, this is awesome. Like, this would be so empowering. And then as you read it and you kind of get into these different scenarios of like what that would look like. And it's one of those things where at the end, it's kind of funny. Like, I don't read it and be like, oh yeah, like society would just be exactly the same, but opposite, you know, in terms of gender roles if this happened. But I think the book itself is really tongue in cheek about it. And it's more of just, it's like I said, we had this great discussion in the book club after it because it's a wild jumping off point for all kinds of like, do you think this would happen? Or, you know, what would you do if this happened? Or like, I'd never thought about how that could make you feel kind of a deal. Mm-hmm. So this isn't so much about like dystopian in and of itself in terms of the book, although it's basically about the collapse of society in a lot of ways. It doesn't quite get to the like, and then the nukes fell and we like went back to caveman times. Like that doesn't happen in the actual physical plot. But it is interesting to think about how much of humanity boils down to just like our base capabilities. Mm-hmm. And, you know, how like what of us comes just from like what we're physically able to do, and how does that change our perspectives of each other? Like there are instances in this book of women getting terrorized by men and like men getting terrorized by women. And it's just like stuff that you don't see very often. And then we're all like, huh, like that is weird. Like, how do I feel about that? Or like, do I think that would happen? It was just kind of a cool book for taking a different exploration to, like, The Handmaid's Tale does this sort of same frame story, if I'm remembering correctly. But it's still, at the end of the day, like the same story about women getting terrorized by men, which is fair and valid. Interesting, but you just don't see the opposite take that much, like in the same sort of framework.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. Like, it sounds like a subversion of like just the common power fantasy that like so many like male dominated stories are.
Yeah, and you just don't see it as much. Like you have maybe like your Fury Roads, for example, were hailed in much the same way about, you know, women being capable of defending themselves, and even criticized by people saying like, oh, it's not feminist, like just because you're putting a woman in like the traditional man's role, which whatever. Like, I don't agree with that take on it, but it's, you know, that was the discourse that was happening. But I just don't think I've encountered personally a story where it was like, well, what if women were just really physically strong to the point that, you know, they could kill you? Because like, I'm very aware of the fact that most dudes could like strangle me with their bare hands and I can't. You know what I mean? That's just something that I'm just born in the world knowing that. I've never experienced anything else. So like, what would it be like for that to not be true anymore? I don't know. I'm not saying asterisk, I would not start strangling people or like electrocuting them or whatever. It's just funny because I'd literally never thought about what that would be like. So yeah, I'd recommend it.
Yeah, cool. You know what? To put a little footnote on this book, which if it wasn't clear, I haven't read it. It sounds very cool. But there's this short essay by Ursula K. Le Guin. I don't know when it's from. It might be from like the early 90s or something, but it's called Introducing Myself. And it really like flipped my brain because it's about how at the time she was coming up and getting famous, she was like kind of the singular like female writer in like, especially in like a genre like sci-fi and fantasy, which was still like expanding. She was like literally the only female in the room at a convention. And the essay is kind of sarcastically, but honestly about how she has no choice but to like be a man when she writes, because that is the voice of this genre. And it was just something I hadn't really thought about, like having the pressure to like have to tell a story in a certain way, even though it's like not your natural voice or way you want to tell the story, being like influenced by this like unseen force of like an expectation of something, which is like when I hear people like having a problem with like a female protagonist who's like an action star or something. It's like, haven't you ever thought about how it's like there can be other variations of that, and it shouldn't be such an odd thing. And like the fact that it is an odd thing is like the bigger problem. I don't know if the essay is exactly about that, because it's not, it's more like about science fiction and the style that she writes. But I don't know, it's like a good essay. And when you were describing that book, it's like, oh, I wonder if this author encountered that essay at some point, because like thematically, it kind of feels like it.
I haven't read that, but I'd like to read it.
Yeah, it's quick. Like you can find it somewhere. It's good. It's just a little like, yeah. And I mean, Ursula K. Le Guin, she rules. Like everything she writes is perfect.
Yeah, she is really awesome.
So I just thought it was a good way to slip her into the conversation a bit. Cool. Good recommendation.
We're crushing this list. Good stuff only.
I'm going to go with just an obvious one, because I don't really ever want to like do a whole episode on this, but I feel like it kind of has to be in the mix. So I picked Watchmen, because it's kind of played out to talk about Watchmen if you're like into comics or just like into popular culture, because it gets adapted or like turned into, I think the HBO show is actually really great, and I recommend that. The movie is not that great. It's kind of just like a redo of the book, even though it's got a cool opening.
With less cool of an ending, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. So Watchmen, if you're not familiar, classic 80s dystopian thing. We've got a broken, hollow, humorless world. And I think what holds up really well with Watchmen is like the archetypes of characters that are in it. So you have like Ozymandias, who's like the world's smartest man, who's like solution to fixing the world at this point, because it's so far gone, is to just like reboot it, basically, to like bring it to utter despair and like let it come back from that point, which is like a pretty common villain thing in this day and age. And you've got like all these like psychologically damaged characters that are either like living in the shadow of their family legacy, like the Silk Spider, or you've got Rorschach, who's just kind of become like a psychological mess, as he's like a darker version of a Batman. And the Night Owl is just like addicted to heroism. And who else? You've got like Dr. Manhattan, who just is detached from humanity. So there are all these like polar ends of extreme personality if you were a character that was like imbued with a great responsibility of heroism. So I thought we should shout that one out, because it's just packed with tropes. And I also, in the comic book, something that doesn't quite ever make it into the adaptations, there's this weird element of, there's a kid reading, I don't know what the comic is, but it's this kind of like pirate story where this castaway is riding on a raft of like corpses, and the sharks are like eating at them. He's trying to escape. It's cool. It's just weirdly dark. But as a person who makes comics, I appreciate the way you can do this with a comic book. You can inject these little like thematic or like tone setting elements within the book that aren't necessarily part of the overall story. So I thought it would be good to just kind of bring up a comic book just to get to some of that storytelling element that's pretty unique to comics. It's harder to do that in a novel. Of course, novels do it where you interject like a story within a story. But comics, because they have that visual element, it's a lot neater in some ways.
Well, it reminds me of The Breadwinner a little bit, using that little other animation in it, which again was something we remarked at the time is like not something that you see a lot in movies.
Yeah, that is something that is probably going to pop up more and more, just kind of changing the tone of the story within the story to like speak or to let you reflect on some of the elements and themes. The movie just isn't doing the things the comic is. I mean, even the layout of the comic and the color palette, the structure of the panels, like all these things are extremely intentional and just kind of, help the story move. And the movie just can't do that.
Should have done it the Spider-Verse way.
Oh, totally. That would be pretty sweet. Ooh, I hope this like journey down this comic aesthetic in animation kind of does reflect on page layout in the future. To be honest, I would love to see more panel layout compositional experiments.
Yeah, you'd think we would apply that more instead of shoehorning the cinematic aspect onto it instead. I don't know. We could be really in love with that.
Ooh, we'll have to find a cartoon that's got a real comic. I'm sure there's a weird short somewhere that's dealing with panels in an interesting way. We'll dig it up.
Homework.
Yep.
Oh, is it me again?
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm cheating at this point a little bit because I'm just doing, it's not even a series, but just kind of several books in the same universe.
Okay.
And as I mentioned before, like Jeff Vandermeer is one of my favorite authors. Ever since I read Annihilation, I was transported to a terrifying place that I really liked. And I'd recommend any of his books. I haven't read all of them, but I recommend most of them. But I think my unexpected sort of favorite started with the first book in this universe that he wrote. I believe it was in 2016. And it's called Born, Borne. And that is a novel set in this post-apocalyptic, futuristic, but kind of ambiguous setting. Like it's never said, this is Earth exactly or anything like that. It's kind of hard to read in a good way. And the ensuing books in the same universe are like only triple down on that. So if you're gonna read these, I really would highly recommend starting with this one. Or he also wrote a really short little novella that I love and find emotionally devastating. It's so freaking good. It's called Strange Bird, and it's set in the same world as this, and you don't need to, the stories are totally unrelated, so there's a little tiny bit of overlap, but you don't need to read any one in particular to experience any of the others. But basically it all takes place in this city. It's like this ruined city. And the focal point of the city is this company building. And it's just called The Company with like a capital C, classic, like weird dystopian sci-fi trope. It's never ever said even like what the point of this company is actually or where it came from. And it's all very mysterious and kind of creepy and alien. But the world has a lot of like biotechnology in it, just kind of in the world. And that's like what the company has its hand in. And like a big, I guess, antagonist in this book is this giant bear. He's like stories tall, like a huge bear who can also fly. And like this visual like sounds so ridiculous, but like he's legitimately really kind of like badass in one sense and terrifying in another, because like he's not anyone's friend. He's just like this horrific, like disgusting force of nature. That is heavily implied to have been a person once that used to work at the company. And their whole deal is like, there's a lot of weird body horror kind of stuff that happens in these books. And it only gets worse the more books it goes on again. And I mean that in a very good way. Like a lot of really fantastical imagery and just like wild stuff is happening. This is why like I really hesitate to recommend this book to people who haven't read any of this stuff, but Dead Astronauts came out in 2019, and that's, I guess, the third story in this universe, if you're counting Strange Bird. And it's, like, inscrutable, and I absolutely love it. It's so good, but it's just all of these, like, weird dystopian sci-fi, like, future fantasy elements just cranked to the max. and I love it. But it's just one of those things where, like, I was looking through Goodreads earlier to kind of refresh my memory because it's been a while since I've read Born, the first one. And on the Dead Astronauts page, there was like, ask questions about this book. And somebody was like, will I be able to understand Dead Astronauts if I haven't read Born? And the person who answered was like, you might not even understand Dead Astronauts if you have read Born. I was like, that is totally true, but I really can't recommend them more highly, knowing as I say that it's like, it's not going to be for everyone. They're hard books to read, but I think they're so great. There is something that Jeff Vandermeer does in particular where he really incorporates a lot of ideas about like biology and animal cognition and like alien ways of thinking and perceiving the world that feels really satisfying to me as like, I haven't encountered this before. Like, this is kind of a unique perspective on what that could mean or how this might exist in the world. And all of it is kind of couched in this really depressing, like climatological disaster sort of end of the world feeling. Because I don't want to spoil any of these because I'm just like, go read them. Like, they're so good. But you kind of find out at the end of Born that what is happening is that the company has been stealing all of its resources from the future or the past. It's like really not clear, but they have this window, like they get down into the bowels of this like building and there's this window to another place. And it becomes apparent that they've been stealing resources from their own planet, I guess, or something, like basically exporting the apocalypse until it finally like came back home to them. And it's just like everywhere you go in this journey is really fascinating to me. So that's another one that if you haven't read it and this is your jam, I would say it's definitely worth it. And Dead Astronauts is just like, I don't know. It's like, do you want to read an epic poem about this stuff? Then that's for you.
I was excited. I haven't read this. I've read, The Annihilation. What's that series called?
It's the Area X or like Southern Reach trilogy.
Right, the Southern Reach. Yeah, I've gone through those. I enjoyed them. This is definitely hard sci-fi, which I have like. I go through phases with things like this. Sometimes I'm deeply into it, and sometimes I just want something like a little more grounded. Like phases of like 10-year spans where I'm like, I'm deep in. Now I got to get out for a while and like think about, I don't know, contemporary, just normal literature about like a domestic family.
I totally get like they don't make it easy. And like even the Southern Reach trilogy, like
it's tough.
It doesn't spell out a lot of the stuff. Like by the time it gets to the end, like it hasn't answered all of your questions. And I had a friend who read them and he was like so pissed about it for some reason and like messaging me about it, which is kind of odd. I don't know why you would do that. He was like so mad about it. And I was like, I'm sorry you didn't like the books. Like, I don't know what you want me to tell you. But he was like really upset that it was like, I think to him it felt like it was nonsense. And I don't agree. So like friends who know me know that I'm really not a fan of like Murakami, for example, which some people love Murakami and I just don't. Like, I don't hate it. I don't even dislike it. I just don't click with any of the Murakami stuff that I've read. Because to me, it feels like there's no point to the stories, which feels very harsh. I'm not saying that literally, but it feels like he's writing stuff more because like to write or to write things that are beautiful or like imagery that is beautiful more so than getting at a greater point of the stuff that I've read. Yeah. And it just doesn't work for me. And I think, if that's how you felt about like Southern Reach or something like this, I totally get that, but I don't think it is. Like, I think the answers are in the text. And I find it very pleasurable to try to piece the story together myself with kind of the evidence that's been given to me by these books. Like Dead Astronauts is that on hard mode. Like you can read a whole chapter of that book and have no idea what happened, but like it is something. I don't know how to like get at, because some of it too is like characters in Born that are mentioned once will, show up in some minute way in Dead Astronauts. And if you don't know that really well, you're not going to put those things together. But it's kind of perfect if like me, you become just totally sucked in by that world and you love it so much, like all of the pieces to put together, you know, a coherent singular narrative are there. It's just if you want to do that or not.
I think if you're on the fence about checking him out, just go look up the book cover art. And if you're on board with the imagery on the book cover art, like the Bourne book cover is a weird collage of like animal elements, but really doesn't add up to anything familiar and recognizable. To me, like if you like his book covers, you probably might get into the books.
He's got great taste. This is one of my favorite. I'm glad you mentioned this so I can just like brag about this, even though no one will care except for me. But like, there's this really amazing artist named Kathleen Neely who does lino cut art, and she's super duper talented. And it's so weird because we like went to middle school together.
Whoa.
That's what's so strange to me. She's like turbo famous, and she should be. I have a bunch of her prints that I've snagged over the years. I have this giant print of hers in our dining area, and it's kick ass. But basically one of my favorite objects that I own is an illustrated version of Dead Astronauts. It's like full of her art, and it's freaking awesome. Like she did the cover, and then there's a bunch of like illustrations in between and like art on the back of the book. And I kind of hate it because like that's never going to come out of the plastic wrap that it came to me in. And I'm not really that way about most things. Like I don't really care if my stuff gets a little bit ruined or like nibbled on by rats or whatever, because I buy a lot of my stuff, even if it's collector stuff, to use it. I don't really cotton with the idea of keeping things precious, but like if anything happens to my Kathleen Neely illustrated copy of Dead Astronauts, like I will be extremely upset. So it's just a precious object. We all have those in our lives.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool. I would recommend looking it up. And her, she's super talented. So.
And we can also put in the show notes your interview with Jeff Vandermeer.
Yeah, that's Jeff. If you're listening, Mr. Vandermeer, I should say, let's do a round 2 or something. I'd love to collaborate because that wasn't, for circumstances beyond my control, it wasn't what it could have been, I think. But I did have an interview. I had the pleasure and delight to interview him when I was working at the Atlantic and do an animated interview. But for behind the scenes reasons, didn't end up getting kind of it feels like a missed opportunity to me. I'd love to revisit it. Just putting that out into the universe. But I'll still share it.
So I'm going to lighten the mood a little bit. I went with another teen fave of mine, Tank Girl, which I feel like I offhandedly mentioned at one point.
Yeah, we talked about it in, what was it? It was in one of our last episodes, though.
Yeah, I brought it up recently. It was fresh in my mind, but I thought I would dig into it a little more. So Tank Girl, it's a British comic book. I believe it still exists, but the original incarnation was by Jamie Hewlett, who went on to create the Gorillas. So that's what he's most famous for. He's the artist. And it was written by his friend Alan Martin. And it was just a real cool indie comic that came out in a serialized form and probably some kind of cool punky music zine, I believe, for a while, and then was later collected by like Dark Horse Comics and brought to America for young, angsty, hair-dyed, leather bracelet wearing like teens like myself to discover. And Tank Girl, it's not heavy on plot, was probably the most interesting thing to me about it. It didn't have like a story you had to really pay attention to. So, but it does have a basic setup. So the setup is Tank Girl is a young woman living in the Australian outback, and she's an outlaw because originally she was a tank operator for the Australian Army, and under the command of the Army, she was sent to deliver a colostomy pouch system to President Hogan, who is like Paul Hogan of Crocodile Dundee fame. So extremely sarcastic and ridiculous right off the bat. And she blows it, like she blows the job. And she gets attacked by mutant kangaroos, who she later goes on to date and have a love affair with one of them.
Wow, this does sound really good.
Yeah, so she doesn't make the delivery. And from here on, she's like basically a military renegade. She keeps the tank, but then like makes it her home. So it's decorated with all kinds of cool like teen bedroom stuff. There's like posters, like swear words written all over it and like weird, like googly eye smiley faces and like fuzzy dice all over the thing. And Tank Girl is extremely crude and rude and fun and extremely energetic. Like it's just a book packed full of character poses. Like every panel, she's just doing something totally different. One panel, she might be sitting on like the barrel of the tank wearing like a helmet with goggles, smoking a cigar. And the next, she's just like taking a shit naked for some reason. But the conversation is still going from the last panel. So
is there any other way?
Yeah, it's all over the place. Also, she's brushing her teeth while she's on the toilet, probably.
Now that's a violation.
There's nose picking. There's like farts. There's spitting. Like her hair is often shaved with just a little tuft in the front that's various colors. Sometimes it's really long. Sometimes it's kind of short. It's always unwashed. And it's just a real apocalyptic setting in kind of the fun way. It's just a desert landscape. The only people she really encounters are, mutant kangaroos, of course. A couple other military-themed vehicle girls, like there's Jet Girl and Sub Girl, of course, who she befriends.
I was wondering if there was like an expanded universe. Like, what other types of girls are there?
That's it. That's the end of the expansion. It kind of ends at Tank Girl and Sub Girl and Jet Girl.
No boys?
No, the only boys are the mutated kangaroo guys.
Well, that
really.
Seems fine.
Yeah, it is fine. And but there are like little, I'm describing it in the fun way where it's totally ridiculous, but there will be like kind of magical, quiet, more tender, mythical moments, like the Aboriginal people around her that are watching her like go on her crazy, like violent, punky exploits. They seem to like see her as like a personification of like some ancient female spirit. And there's a lot of like glyphs and folk art on the backgrounds of cave walls and stuff in certain scenes. So there is kind of like some world building lore to it, like this kind of belief that she's like this superhero character just simply because she doesn't seem grounded to anything that they can like make sense of. So it's cool. There's like weird incarnation stuff going on, but it's all like just kind of hinted at. Most of the stories are ridiculous short plots about her, going on some weird mission where she has to get something and bring it back, but along the way gets distracted and does something totally different. That end.
That does sound good.
Yeah, it's fun. It's just got a cool energy. Like when we're talking about stories that are hard to describe, but they just kind of have a tone and a vibe and a creative personality that seems really unique. This is just one of those things. And if you're a fan of things like the gorillas and like the look and feel of those cartoons, this is like the more raw version of that. So yeah, Tank Girl, look it up. Fun, crazy.
You're like, where can I get this? After you talked about it the first time, I had people message me independently to be like, because I said I hadn't ever like encountered it. So people were like, you should though. It's really good. So I just need to find.
I'll send you the link to whatever the Dark Horse Omnibus collection. That's like the original Jamie Hewlett story. Because it's fun to watch it grow. It's, like we talk a lot about our own work, and if you talk to any artist about their work and you look through kind of as they sort of like build their muscles as a storyteller, there's always those early projects where they're like trying to find their voice and their place, and they're kind of cobbled together, like Secret of Kells is kind of one of those things. Tank Girl is like a magical artifact of Jamie Hewlett because you can really see him get extremely talented really quickly. And he starts out strong, but just his character design and the energy of his work grows really fast. And all these elements I'm talking about the like kind of spiritual element to this, these come in like the later stories as he's getting a little more ambitious with what he wants to say and do with this stuff. So it's also kind of a great little, piece of culture in that way. If you want to just kind of think about storytelling in like weird kind of out there dystopian settings, Jamie Hewlett's little adventure that he goes on with Tank Girl for such a limited time, because he moved on pretty quickly, like got famous pretty quickly. But it's just like a nice little project. Whether you're into tanks or girls or whatever, like, check it out.
Why not both?
Yeah, you can love both.
Okay, do you have honorable mentions? Should we trade these off too, or are you?
Oh, my honor. Well, I just thought I'd shout out Wally. just cause,
oh yeah, Wally, our one attempt. There was an attempt for deeper meaning. Pixar, thank you. You have been seen. Baby's first dystopia.
I didn't really have anything else. For a moment, I was considering talking about like the Alien franchise, because that is truly a dystopian reality that poor Ripley is fucking struggling through.
And the Geigerness, though, too, is very apropos with our visual. That's one thing. I'm going to tack on another one at the very, very end that's like a movie, so I can have some kind of visuals to talk about, because I liked that. Ending on Tank Girl was cool because talking about the visual aspect of those kinds of stories and also like making them fun. Like I found myself in my old age having a harder time reading dystopian stuff because it feels a lot more real now.
Yeah.
And so then it's not fun. And so this is a great segue into my first honorable mention really quickly is Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, which I also read for the first time a year or two ago. My friend let me borrow it. And I really liked it, but I was just realizing that I didn't have that much to say about it because the reason it stuck with me is that it felt like a little bit too real and also like kind of mundane. And that's like the point of it, really. So it wasn't, that's not a criticism, really. It's just that like Roadside Picnic has all of this really fantastical imagery and these really like heartbreaking concepts that aren't grounded in real reality. And Parable of the Sower is a story about climate change like slowly encroaching on humanity and the devolution of society because of lack of resources and that kind of thing. And then people like having a seed of hope to kind of maybe we can figure out a different way to live so that things aren't so bad.
Yeah.
But it's still a great, it's a classic for a reason. I'd recommend it. And the second one I wanted to talk about that was a book, was The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, who we've talked about a little bit already. And the like subtitle of this book is An Ambiguous Utopia. So I was like, does this even count? Like, if we're supposed to be talking about like dystopian, like future stuff, like I don't know if I can talk about it. It claims to be a utopian novel, but there's a lot of dystopian elements in it. And also it's a great book. It's probably my favorite Le Guin book that I've read. I haven't read all of them, but I really, really liked this one for a lot of reasons. But I liked that the utopian society in The Dispossessed is not like Star Trek post-scarcity. Everybody has everything they need. It wasn't really that. It's like kind of honest about this form of utopian society, which is like anarcho-syndicalism, like everybody owns nothing, essentially. Everybody has everything that they need or can get access to everything they need. Like your room isn't your room. It's the room that you sleep in, that kind of thing. And that kind of goes for everything in this aspect of society. There's like a lot of really obvious downsides, like that they're not living a luxurious lifestyle. It's very utilitarian in a lot of ways by necessity. And then it's contrasted with, there's 2 planets in this book, and one of them is kind of this utopian, like syndicalist society, and then the other one is basically Earth, Turbo Earth. And we spend some time there in the novel, and it's kind of terrible. It's intensely patriarchal. There's like labor riots happening and like political unrest and war and all of these things because their society is built in this really capitalistic kind of egregious way. It sort of feels to me like Hunger Games got a lot of its ideas from like a very cursory reading of this society. It feels like a pale shadow. Not to like totally dump on Hunger Games. It's just I don't love Hunger Games. And it feels like a very, very slight imitation of like getting at some of the stuff that happens in The Dispossessed, where there are these parties of these people who are just dressed totally ridiculously and like completely bratty, and they're, the upper class in this society. So that's a good one. Maybe read other Ursula K. Le Guin books before or also. I don't know.
Yeah, fucking read them all.
Yeah, read them all.
I mean, I guess, what's the first one in this series? Left Hand of Darkness?
I actually don't know. Like, I don't know what the order is. And I've only read the ones that I have read in this like Hainish cycle. I've only read them out of order, just picking at random sort of what sounded good. And then I've read most of the Earthsea books. I haven't actually read the last one or two.
Wow. I just found a fun fact here. So
finally,
Ursula yeah. Enough of these bland facts. Here's a fun one.
Oh, a fun fact, you say?
Ursula K. Le Guin's parents were friends with father of the atom bomb, Robert Oppenheimer.
That sucks.
That's fucked. I don't know if it's fucked, but it's, yeah, like that's just an interesting, it's not a coincidence. I mean, like, I guess that's kind of an element. She says she modeled the character of, what's his name? Shrevek?
I think it's just Shevek, but I like the idea that it's Shrek.
But I guess this little note here says that character is kind of modeled on Oppenheimer and the fact that she knew him. That's just kind of crazy.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
What a person to have like grown up being around. I mean, I don't actually know where he was in his development of the bomb at that point. It's just kind of interesting since we sort of started this whole conversation with like nuclear elements, but
yeah, it's all going to end that way. That's for sure. Hopefully not.
Yeah.
Mutually assured destruction. And I do have just one more purely visually, because I don't know. I have really mixed feelings about this one, but Isle of Dogs. Did you see Wes Anderson's Isle of Dogs?
I almost threw that one in there, but it didn't resonate too deeply with me.
That's because, like, so I have such mixed feelings about that movie because the first time I saw it, I was like, I love this movie. It's so good. But like, and then the second time I was like, it's not good. And I actually think maybe it might be a bad movie in my opinion, but the visuals are so good to me that it like elevated it to such a degree, because that I just like don't know what that movie is saying in terms of story at all. And that's a whole different thing. Like I just don't know about it. Still love the aesthetic, and I want Wes Anderson to do more animated stuff because I really like what he does with it. But
yeah,
I don't know, whatever the story aside, that movie is like a really good depiction of just a trash world. You know, it's not in a post-apocalyptic future per se, but it just takes place largely in this desolate, literally trash island where all the garbage is dumped. So everything is just stacks of like cubes of garbage or just piles of garbage. And there is one or two scenes that take place in what is like a cave of plastic bottles. So they're like inside this structure and it's all illuminated from the outside, and it's all multicolored, like red and yellow and green bottles. And it's like really beautiful. And I mean, I guess trust Wes Anderson to make trash look good, but it's just like something kind of fun to play with. Like, and you talking about Tank Girl reminded me of that, because it's not fun. When I think of these stories, I usually think of like depression and being sad and like starving to death in an atomic wasteland or what have you. But I don't think about, it's like the natural human tendency to try to make the best of a bad situation, I guess, or like finding the beauty in that. So shout out to Isle of Dogs for aesthetic.
It is a good one because it is such an evocative setting. I almost want like another story set there or something with that same cast of dogs, like earlier in time or something like that. Because it just, I mean, I guess that's the thing with a lot of these dystopian stories. They're like extremely evocative, like in the visual elements that they can kind of wrangle, the way they like take familiar like conveniences and stuff that makes us comfortable in life and just sort of like flips it or twists it or makes it like a weird alien artifact that's like collected in a zone, you know, like all these different ways we can like subvert the familiar and comforting. Seems to be like kind of a general theme with a lot of this stuff.
And it's funny, like I didn't think of Isle of Dogs at all this whole time, but I guess it's just kind of funny because like we as human beings apparently really like to talk about this stuff. And I wonder why. Like, a lot of it seems to be really explicitly motivated by the horrors of war or money. Like, a lot of it, like, living in capitalist, like, societies or, you know, societies in which a large amount of people are impoverished. Just basically about the human struggle. Like, is that why? I don't know. It just, there's so many different ways to tell what seems to be the same story. And then I guess, like, looking back at all of the things that we've talked about, like, they're not telling the same story. Like, The Power is not about the same thing as Fantastic Planet and so on.
Yeah, it's like to maybe bring it back to like the poem that started. It's like the concern from the creative standpoint. It's like, what are we actually leaving an impression? Like, we'll destroy the world maybe, but like, will it even know that we were here or something, like in its greater context? Like, that would Spring herself like know that we were here?
No, the best we can hope for is that some alien race or like some, you know, like amoeba will trickle up through the evolutionary chain and like find our bones and like put us in a museum. Because I can think of no greater compliment than like Toy Story 2 style, like put my skull in like a glass case with a bunch of other people's skulls so that people can be like, whoa.
Yeah.
That is what humanity truly aspires to. That's all for now. Join us next week as we walk down man's road to Rankin Basstown with the last unicorn. That is all I've got to say.
Lots of Easter eggs there in that statement. And it's kind of kicking off our Rankin and Bass series, right?
Yeah, we're starting out on a new journey away from dystopia to the 1980s again, I guess.
Yeah, welcome back to the 80s. So while you're waiting for next week, you can check out our episode archive and other facts about Caitlin and I at cartoonfeelings.com. You can tweet at us or join us on Instagram, and both of those are found at Feeling Cartoons.
That's true, Ira. And in addition, if you have any thoughts / questions, you can write to us at cartoonfeelingspodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any other series that you might be interested in, we'd love to know. And if you're enjoying the podcast, we would be super duper grateful if you would consider taking the time to rate us on Apple Podcasts or leave us a review or both. And definitely sharing us with your animator friends or your storytelling friends or artist friends. That would mean so much to us. So thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to everybody who's said some nice things about the show so far. That means we're talking to other people than just each other, which is cool to think about.
It's kind of a first for both of us. Never done that before.
It's good to get out there in some way or other, even if we're not actually.
Please respond. Hello.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll see you next time, everybody.